All right. Well, this is going to be our format here for doing our swatches. So I made a 12 by 12 grid. Each square is half an inch. And yeah, so we're just going to go ahead and just take whatever color and do the corresponding cross color from it. So we're doing cad yellow light, and or for example, let's say we want to do rose and sky blue. So we find rose and find sky blue, mix them together, and then put them here. And then from there we can also go from sky blue and do rose. So we'll do those both at the same time. Yeah, there we go. When you do your grid, make sure you use a permanent pen or marker and use waterproof ink for it. So I'm just using a ballpoint pen for most of these, so that's why. In order to avoid making a mess and a bleed into the colors that we're putting into the square. So one thing you might notice is that as you go around the grid, you go from where your color first starts, and the further away you get from the color wheel, the more brown it becomes. So your brown is basically a combination of a color and its opposite. So the further away from the color that you start with, the more brown it becomes. And so as you make your way back around the color wheel, it then becomes more and more like the original color again. So that's just kind of the circular rainbow that we got, and why it's kind of known as a color wheel. So one thing I'd want to redo here is this cobalt blue, which I think was this one. Okay, let's move on to our next color, gamboge. One alternate way of doing the color wheel also is by adding white to each of our mixtures. So, for example, we have gamboge mixture. Add yellow. Gamboge. But as you can see, adding white to it actually grays it down and makes it look cooler. So that's a very valuable lesson to learn about mixing white into your gouache. It really changes the character of the gouache itself. As far as color goes. But it's a good way to get to know your colors a bit more. And then to anticipate what will happen with your colors as you mix white into them to lighten them. It's not always going to be what you expect or even what you want, but it's good to know because you're going to be doing it pretty much all the time. So that's pretty cool to see what happens, right? Next, let's make room on our palette for our next round of color. So we keep doing this over and over again. So one of the interesting things that I've noticed between the cool yellow and the warm yellow is that, as predicted, everything is going to shift to be a little more bright because they're, especially in the warms, because they skew a little bit more toward red. When they're in the same family of colors, they're going to keep more of their characteristics, whereas a cooler yellow is going to push it a little more toward brown. So the opposite happens when you go with cool colors. These are going to be pushed a little more toward brown and away from their own natural characteristics. You can also see that when you add white to everything. So just something to keep in mind there, and one of the discoveries that you will make while you're doing these swatches. By the way, they don't necessarily have to be perfect. I mean, I could do a much better job than I'm doing right now if I really tried, but this is more just for my own discovery. It's definitely not going on a wall anywhere, but just staying in my sketchbook. So we don't have to worry about it being so exact, but the more exact it is, of course, the more informative it will be. All right, let's move on to our orange. Okay, our third color is done, and you might be noticing a trend here where the browns are coming from, it's starting to shift depending on where on the color wheel these opposites fall from each other. So as you can see, the yellows, the purple is where it really starts to become brown. So as you move further down on our row of swatches, the browns start to shift further and further down. So something to keep in mind there. Okay, let's move on now to cadmium red. Our palette's actually very close to orange, but it's definitely more in its own sphere of color. It's going to mix with its adjacent colors in a much cleaner way than cadmium orange would, so that's why I feel like it's still a valuable color to have on your palette, even if it's visually on its own very close to the cadmium orange we have on here, especially when you mix with the white. Okay, one thing you may have noticed here is when we mix cobalt blue and sky blue, and really any of the blues and greens, but especially the blues, we got brown. So why? Aren't you supposed to get purple from red and blue? Well, the thing is, we're mixing a warm into a warm from an opposite side of the color wheel, and that's always going to get you a brown. Even mixing a cool to a cool on the opposite side of the color wheel is going to get you a version of brown too, although it's going to be a cooler brown than the warmer browns that we're mixing into each other. So it's really the result of where they are on the color wheel than what you perceive to be what's supposed to happen. So you just have to get rid of that assumption and look at the science behind it. All right. Now let's move on to rose. It's going to be an interesting color because it's a little bit outside of our normal gamut. We're starting to get into the cool colors. This is a kind of a weird cool color because it's just sits somewhere in between red and violet without really feeling like either of them. So let's see what happens. Kind of hard to tell the difference between these two, actually. See if we can bring out different character to the colors with some white in them. So one of the nice things about doing these swatches and adding white to them is you can really see the color interaction in a different perspective, in a way that maybe sometimes is not as clear without adding white to modify it. Like sometimes you just end up with this dark color that you can't quite make sense of, but as soon as you add white to it, it then becomes a lot more clear what is actually happening. So those two together, adding white, makes like a really nice lavender sort of. So adding those two together makes sort of a really nice lavender sort of color to them. It's a really nice sort of electric violet that comes out of mixing those two colors together. I'm not sure I added enough violet actually to our mixture in the first place, so let's go ahead and do that. So now, can you see the difference that mixing a cool red into a cool blue makes? It's so much more taking on the color of the violets that we were after, instead of opposing each other. That's an interesting color. It's a dark, warm violet instead of being more of a dark, cool magenta like Brilliant Violet did. Again, see what's happening? We're moving the threshold of where it becomes a gray color further down, one step below where it happened in the last color mixture, because it's that magenta and jade are opposite each other on the color wheel. Dark brown greens that are going to be very important to us if we're going to be taking this color palette out in nature. Okay, so now look what's happening with our grays. They're kind of shifting in temperature. So let's see what happens when we go all in with magenta. We're doing rose, so let's do the kind of darker version of rose and use magenta. So as we're doing this color swatching, you may be coming to the realization that this may not be the best palette for doing really deep, rich darks. So when we come across some really dark colors that come together, or when you notice two colors that come together to make some rich, deep darks, we really have to make note of them and store them away, and maybe even make a note physically about it, because if we notice that like sky blue and magenta makes a really deep dark purple, and leaf green and magenta also makes a deep dark greenish brown. That's going to be something that maybe if you put together, you get a pretty dark neutral. So those are things that, in absence of something like neutral tint or Payne's gray or anything like that, that's what we're going to be relying on to get any sort of neutral darks that we may need as we paint. Okay, let's move on to Brilliant Violet. Excited to see how this one interacts with our other colors here. The cool grays are really starting to come out now. as we mix violet and green together, they're a little bit more opposite of each other on the color wheel, so that's why we're getting these kinds of grays now, which is really neat to see. That's a beautiful gray. I actually really love that. Just has some green with just a hint of that violet peeking through. It really makes for a nice interaction of color there. So subtle. That's interesting. Really seems like that spring, or is it spring green? The leaf green. No, this was the spring green, right? Yeah. The spring green really tends to take over in our mixture with the brilliant violet. Don't totally know why, but interesting interaction. All right, getting there. Let's now move on to cobalt blue. All right, let's see what we get with cobalt blue. The sky blue seems to be some sort of phthalo, so it's not as opaque as the cobalt blue next to it, which is interesting. Good to know. This seems to make for a really nice sort of ocean water color here. So it'll be a valuable mixture for me in particular. This also looks like it'll be a great color for water. And that's also going to be a really beautiful aqua sort of tone. So work great for certain colors in the light that are marine based. So not much to say there, other than we've already made our transition from blues to browns back here, where we started to look at our cobalt blues. Our browns were actually like way up here, where cat orange, cat red, and rose start to mix with each other. So that's really what's happening here. Is like you just kind of have to look at what's going on as you make your way down and back up. They kind of circle each other. We're just kind of moving our way one square at a time around the color wheel. Let's go ahead and move on to jade. Or no, sky blue actually. Sky blue and jade together. Let's see what we end up with. That's a beautiful color as well. That feels like a color I should own. These two colors are just so similar in value and really close to each other on the color wheel that they really just only slightly modify each other. green together there. Let me make sure. That just didn't seem right. So that makes more sense. Okay, now let's do what we really meant to do. Jade and leaf green. And now jade and spring. I hope that watching this was valuable for you, not only watching it come together, but sort of my thought process and analysis of the color combos as they came together. So, what is the next step here once you have a color chart? Well, the answer is simple and should be obvious. We make a painting using our newfound knowledge, and maybe you picked up a little bit of painting ability from doing this. So that will be in the next video, so join me there.